Hi, everyone. My name is Hannah Ubel. I am one half of Good Company Consulting. Lisa Walden, who you will hear from in a moment, is the other half of Good Company Consulting. And we put together this webinar that you are about to watch, Maintaining a Healthy Culture During the Time of COVID-19. We have this introductory message because as you watch this webinar, you will see that about 9 minutes in, there are some technological glitches that happen. And rather than re-recording the whole thing, we decided, and actually EIC had the great idea, to keep it all in there because that is the nature of how these events go these days. There are bound to be some technological glitches, but it's because of all of the teams coming together and understanding each other that we can push through those glitches.
Yeah, so I was behind the scenes and I was in the chat room manning the questions coming in. And I noticed that Hannah was supposed to be advancing through some slides that weren't going through. I wasn't seeing them. So me and the EIC team, we connected behind the scenes, we talked it through, we figured it out, and we pivoted. And like you can see in the presentation itself, nobody planned for a pandemic to hit this world. It wasn't in anyone's strategic plan. So much like that, the slides going wrong, it's not about the fact that they went wrong or that there was a glitch. It was about how we responded to it. And everyone on that webinar responded with such grace and kindness, including the participants themselves. So I'm really glad that we're honoring the mistake and leaving it as is because that's life.
Exactly. So thank you for listening to this introductory message. As you will see in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen when you watch the webinar, you will still see the slides. So you will be able to see what's supposed to coincide with the message. And I will close this message by saying a huge thank you to Lisa, to the EIC team for coming together and pushing through to make this whole thing happen because it wasn't predictable, but we figured it out and we pivoted, and that's the whole point of what we're trying to do right now.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. This presentation is being recorded and will run approximately 60 minutes, including question and answer time at the end, and will also be available in Events Industry Council's Knowledge Hub. All attendees today will receive their CEs approximately 1 week after the webinar. Before I turn things over to our moderator, I would like to address a few logistical items. Attendees can listen to the webinar through their computers or by dialing in using the number and passcode provided by the Zoom software. If you have any questions, please do not wait until the end of the presentation to submit them. We always encourage you to submit your questions using the question box seen on the screen. We will address as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. And we are also excited to introduce a closed captioning tool. You can access closed captioning by clicking the CC closed captioning icon on the bottom right of your screen and then press Show Titles. And next, I'm excited to introduce today's speaker, Hannah Ubel. Hannah is a renowned communication and culture expert and co-founder of Good Company Consulting. Her company's mission is to help organizations create workplaces that don't suck, and it's motivated by the simple idea that the key to any great business is to put people first. And Hannah, I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Derek. Hello, everyone. I am so grateful to be here with all of you today talking about maintaining a healthy culture during the time of COVID-19, which is such a challenge to do, but we're going to talk about it. And you can see my face now. I'm Hannah. I am one half of Good Company Consulting. My colleague, Lisa Walden, is also on this call. She is going to be chatting with you throughout the session today. So you'll also hear her voice when we have questions and things like that throughout. So know that Lisa is here and I am here as well. And to get started, I would love to say hello as is possible right now. So if you can please say hello in the chat and use one word to describe your experience in 2020. This can be any word, anything that comes to mind. But if you can go into chat right now and type in that one word, that would be great to get this started. And while you're doing that, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge everyone who's here on this call. I am a speaker. I am in your industry in a way, in the events and meeting industry. And I know how much work, how much time, how much dedication and passion goes into every single thing that you plan and every single thing that you work on and work towards. So I just want to acknowledge all of that work that you've gone into, and there's so much change like it's happening right now, and there's so much commotion going on, and those events aren't happening the same way. I just want to say, I acknowledge you. I acknowledge that work. I see you, and hopefully I can help you here today in some way as we can. And so with that, I'm just going to take a peek here at some of the words that are coming in to describe your 2020. And it looks like we have surreal, roller coaster, strange, challenging, grateful, dramatic, surprising, unprecedented. Whew, I have felt all those things too. 2020 has been something, okay? Like I don't even really know how to describe it yet. I remember in the beginning of 2020, and maybe some of you felt like this too, it was like 2020, this is my year. Like, this is the time. I can't wait. Pedal to the metal. So much is going to be happening this year. I'm so excited. Events are happening. Events are booked. And then I started reading headlines about COVID-19. And then I got the first call from a client that said, we need to cancel your event that's coming up next week. And at that point, I was like, what is happening? Okay, let's adjust. What is happening? And then more calls came in and more clients were canceling and more things were getting rescheduled. And we're looking at our books for good company, and now we have nothing on the calendar in the coming months, and there's question marks on everything else. And we're like, okay, great, this is fine. Yeah, this feels good. This is okay. I'm mildly panicking, even if it doesn't look like it. Like, this is great, wonderful. There's fires all around me. I can't even put them out. What's happening? And then, of course, you start processing it. And eventually I was like, you know what? We're all in this together. It's okay. We're going to get through this. We're going to pivot, and we're going to change, and we're going to refresh, and we're going to innovate. But seriously, what is happening? I don't understand. I have so many questions. How do you pivot when I've never had to pivot like this before? This is unprecedented. So much is uncertain. Seriously, what is going on? And there's so much going on. I'm almost afraid to ask what to do, what's happening. All of this has truly felt like I've been on an emotional roller coaster. And many of the people that I've been speaking to, especially in the events industry and in the hospitality industry, are saying very similar things. It's like, whew, I'm on this roller coaster. And you know what, jumping around and feeling like we're on this roller coaster, it's bound to feel a little bit messy. We're bound to feel a little bit imperfect because we're human beings. That's who we are. That is how we operate. We're not perfect. We can't keep it together all the time. And I also want to take a moment to acknowledge, right, like this is a little bit of my journey and my story, and everyone on this call right now has their own journey and their own story to share as well. I mean, I think about the reality. You are all problem solvers. That is what you do really, really well. You put out fires. When there's something wrong at an event, when a fire alarm goes off at 2 o'clock in the middle of a panel, when the caterers bring barbecue food in for a vegetarian event, when the speaker can't get there because they're trapped in a snowstorm, you are the ones who figure everything out. And right now, it can feel like I don't even know what to do because so much is beyond my control. That's a little bit uncomfortable. And also, I was working with event planners. We were working with them a little while ago, and they said that for event planners, busy is a competitive sport. We're busy all the time. Like, you don't enter the event industry unless you are ready to be fired up about being productive, about loving to-do lists, checking things off your to-do list. And now all of a sudden those to-do lists have dwindled and it can feel silent, especially if you're one of those people who have been furloughed, if you're working in an organization where there aren't as many of the same people there anymore. with all of that going on, it's going to impact you and it's going to impact your workplace. And so that's really what I'm here to talk about, is that when this impacts your work environment, how can you maintain a healthy workplace culture when all of this is going on? And in everything we do at Good Company, we find that in times when it's not crisis and in times of crisis, the best thing that you can do is put people first. So I'm going to talk about 3 specific areas where you can focus to put people first in your organization so you can maintain that healthy workplace culture during these unprecedented, uncertain, sometimes scary times. And I also want to say too that, everything I talked about, like you're problem solvers, you get things done, that gives me confidence that you are the ones who are going to figure this out before anyone else. So I just want to put that out there. That is Hannah's personal opinion, but is something I truly do believe. Okay, jumping in, what are the things you can do to create this people first culture and maintain this people first culture that you likely all have? Now, the first one I'm going to talk about is connection. I realize connection is something you all probably do very, very well. This is the bread and butter of your industry. And that makes sense that you do this really well because you create moments for connection for other people as well. As humans, we're wired for connection. We need it. We need it all the time. And I thought it was put really well by Lindsay Gibson. She's an author, she's a psychologist, and she said, your need for attention and connection is as old as the human race. You have prehistoric reasons for not liking to be lonely. Connection is what we need after food and shelter. It's the third thing. And I think you can especially see that right now. There's a lot of people craving connection. And when we look at work environments, it's been found over and over again that meaningful relationships at work are one of the most important factors for job satisfaction and well-being. Now, when we study the workplace culture, before any of this stuff started happening, one thing that we were researching is the truth that we're in a loneliness epidemic right now. We are facing loneliness as a very serious issue, as higher rates of loneliness for adults in all areas around the globe in different places. And so when we were looking at this loneliness before, we were addressing, okay, what can we do about this? But now you tie in COVID-19 and you tie in working from home, staying at home, and that adds a different kind of loneliness to what's happening right now. And I'm sure you're all like, thank you, Hannah. This is so uplifting. I apologize. I'm sorry. We're getting to the more uplifting things. But when we think about working from home, I just want to point out that there are these stages, okay? And typically when we talked about working from home in all of our work, we would look at these stages. Mark A.G. wrote them, and I just love them. So the first stage of working from home is typically like, yay, I get to work from home. This is so nice. When you could choose to work, this is so nice. Woo, I'm working from home. And then, looks like we got it. Okay. And then we move on. Oh, you know what? I'm feeling a little bit of technical difficulties here. Just one second.
Hi, Hannah. So it seems like the presentation wasn't moving. So Lisa is controlling your slides now. No worries.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Lisa. Appreciate it. Lisa, can you go to the next slide? Oh, it looks like I'm not seeing Lisa's slide. Thanks for your patience, everyone, as we're figuring out this technology. Just checking in really quickly right now. Okay, so I think there's a potential that the slides might not be working. Give me about a minute and we will double check that they're not working. And if not, I can do this without slides. You're just going to have to look at my face the whole time, and I apologize in advance for that. The slides are kind of cooler to look at than me, but I will do my best. So give me just 1 second here. Okay. I know Lisa's trying to advance the slides. Okay.
Maybe if you want to try it again on your end, Hannah, and see if it works from your end.
Sure. And Derek, you know what? Can I ask this? Do you have an emoji of a pigeon on your slide right now that you can see?
That would be a no, Hannah. We do not
Okay.
see an emoji of a pigeon.
Okay, sorry. I know that's a very random question. Okay, so how about this, folks? Since the slides aren't working, we're going to work through this because this is the virtual work world right now. And I think maybe, Lisa, you can stop sharing your screen. Or you can, maybe you just put it on the resting slide. That even works. I promise the pigeon's really cool, you guys, but you will all get the slide deck. So I know that you will be seeing this eventually. So we'll make sure that you can see some more of the slides. It also is helpful at capturing some of the tips and the takeaways.
Hannah, just jumping in, we can actually see the slides. I think it's you that can't see them. So if you want to keep going, I can follow along and advance the slides for you.
Okay. Okay. Great.
And we are on the pigeon with the emoji slide.
And you all were seeing the pigeon with the emoji slide.
Yes, they are seeing it now.
Okay.
Or they should be. I had the sharing the screen sharing taken away from me. So Derek, if you could give that back, then they should be back on the pigeon slide.
Sure thing.
Okay, we should be back on the pigeon slide. Yes, we're seeing pigeons.
Pigeon.
Hannah, take it away from the pigeons.
Okay, great. Excellent. So, and I will keep my eyes peeled for the chat if the slides aren't advancing again. And all right. So the stages of working from home. That's where we left off. That is where I will jump in. You can see the pigeon now. Yay, I get to work from home. It would be nice to talk to people is the second stage of working from home. And the third stage is I hope that pigeon sits in the window today. Okay, so that was the pigeon. And really when we're looking at these different stages, you know, in times that aren't like these, this is typically how it feels. No matter what, there's a point at which you start to feel a little lonely. It's kind of what happens. Even if you're an introvert, I'm an introvert, I will say, and even working from home, you kind of reach this stage of like, oh man, I'd really like to connect with someone. And now what we're looking at, because there are so many more people who are working from home, we're finding that there is some loneliness potentially going up. There's some research that's recently been done, and 53% of people said that they're experiencing increased loneliness right now when they are working from home, which you can see on the next slide here. So you have less people I know right now that are going into an office that are collaborating like you usually do. You're not going out to events in the same way that you usually do. So there's a lot of missed points for connections. And I will say too that especially for people who are furloughed, and if you're working with people who are furloughed or have been laid off, that is a completely other component of this. It's really easy to feel like you're on an island. And I also want to say too that with connection and with people feeling less connected, feeling like they're on an island, connecting virtually like this is so amazing. I am so grateful for this ability to connect in this way. And I also know that there is something kind of missed when you can't be in person with people. As humans, we're designed to be able to connect in person with people. And in my mind, that's this wonderful, beautiful hope for this industry, is that things are going to look different. Things are going to change about the way that we do things, about the way we do events, but that in-person component will always be really important because it helps us connect in a way that we can't always do virtually. So that all being said, what then can you do to connect with people digitally to maintain that healthy workplace culture that you want to have? There's a couple different things that you can do. The first thing is rethinking how you're using your tools to connect. So these connection tools that we have are awesome. If you think about Skype, WhatsApp, Zoom, text, all these different tools are great. There are so many more that I can't even list right now. And the caveat I will address with this is when we weren't all connecting in this way, many times these tools were used to make our work more efficient, to make ourselves more productive. There is a tendency, there is a potential that using these tools right now to connect so much digitally, eventually it can make us start turning our interactions into transactions. So there's this tendency for sometimes these tools, it can become very transactional when really what we want to be using them for is to build relationships. We want to use these tools for relational reasons. And so some ideas that I'll give you around this, it's finding creative ways to use these tools. So I think of different things that I've heard and different tips and strategies that you can use. And one of them is using Zoom or whatever you typically use with your workforce to have some morning coffee breaks. So this is that moment, like if you are accustomed to going to an office or even calling someone on the phone in the morning, like if you were accustomed to rubbing shoulders, quote unquote, there was always the water cooler talk. There was the hello, how are you? How was your weekend? Tell me about your kids. These kinds of conversations are still very important. And so there are some companies who are creating a time in their calendar throughout the day for different people's schedules to have these virtual coffee breaks. Another thing that you can do, and I love this one, I think it's very fun, is to have company-wide trivia. So the way this works to have company-wide trivia is at the end of a workday, there's someone who has been designated the question master, so to speak, and they will post a question in Slack or Teams or whatever technology you use. And they'll post a trivia question and then people will respond. The first person who gets it right gets a point. They ask 5 questions at the end of the day. There's a running leaderboard, and it's just a really fun way to connect at the end of a day, especially if your days right now are full of conversations, are full of conversations with clients where it's like another thing is changing, another thing is canceled, another thing's rescheduled. It can be so easy to then let that kind of be the end of your day. And this is a way to bring people together at the end of the day in a way that's not just about the fires you're putting out. A third thing you can do is to infuse some humor into your day with connection. In difficult times, a lot of people turn to humor, and one way to do this is to think about Tracksuit Tuesdays. And I was actually talking to my grandma about this. My grandma is 90 years old, and she's had a life, and I was asking her, Grandma, what did you do when you were going through these difficult moments in your life? And she giggled, she kind of chuckled, and she said, oh, honey, as long as you find something to laugh at in the day, you'll get through. I was like, okay, love that. And so Tracksuit Tuesday is an example of that. Also, I've heard people, they post a picture from when they were 15 in a Zoom, and then sometimes they have to guess if they don't look the same as when they were 15. I definitely do not look the same as when I was 15. So there's just a lot of fun ways to do that. You can also have virtual happy hours that are themed. I mean, there's so many different things that you can do. And then another piece I will add is there's a lot of people who have their kids at home, who have their pets. It's a wonderful opportunity to meet the entire #work family, if you will. There's someone I was speaking to, and she's like, you know, my kid is around me all the time right now because they're going through some struggles themselves. And so her 5-year-old is kind of glued to her hip, and she's there in every single meeting anyway. And so at the end of some of these meetings, she'll have her 5-year-old sit on the call with some of her coworkers' kids, and then their kids connect. So all of these are using connecting tools to connect in different ways, which creates some deeper, meaningful relationships and conversations outside of discussing what's happening in the world right now with COVID-19. However, those conversations about what's happening in the world right now are also really important. So one idea of how you can have those conversations, but not draw from these wonderful conversations too, is to have a specific channel where you talk about it. Basecamp, they're a company that's found a way to do this on Slack, they have a specific pandemic channel, and it's where people can go to share articles, to talk about what they're seeing, to talk about what they're reading, to share different designs if you want to sew a face mask. I mean, there's so many different things that they can do here, but it's a way to keep that conversation a little bit contained so it doesn't feel like it's seeping into everything, because it's so easy for that to happen right now. Okay, so that's really about what you can do to use these tools. The second thing that you can do to create even stronger connections is to invest in positive micro moves. Now, if you don't know what a micro move is, or if you just want a definition, I'll give you one. A micro move, and you'll see this on the next slide, it is a small action or behavior that seems inconsequential in the moment, but significantly affects how we relate to one another. These small actions make a huge difference in a time like this. So an example of this, I was talking to someone and she was starting a new project on her team. And so her boss contacted the local bakery and sent a muffin and an orange juice from the local bakery to Karen, to my friend, so that she had some fuel to start her new project. So that's a really unique kind of micro move. Another one that's very, very simple is writing handwritten letters. I know that snail mail is maybe that if this is possible for you to do snail mail, getting a letter that's handwritten feels really, really good. It means that someone took extra time out of their day to find an envelope, to find a stamp, to find letters in their house, to write something to you. And this can be saying, thank you for doing what you're doing. Thank you for showing up and being there for me. Or it can just say, like, this is a funny story I thought I'd share. This is some artwork my kid made for you. Maybe you want it. I mean, there's so many different ways that you can use this that creates those connections. Another simple micro move is turning on your video when you're having conversations with people. It's a really small thing, but it's saying, you know, I want you to see me so that we can connect even more deeply. One other one that I will share and that I would love to hear more from you is acknowledging just what everyone is experiencing right now, especially in your industry. I think of some of the moments where I have felt most grounded, where I have felt most calm, and it's when I've been in my head about something and then someone, an old coworker, a friend who's a meeting or an event planner, someone in my professional network, they send me a quick message and they say, hey, I've been thinking about you. How are you? And then it just opens up this wonderful conversation. Going out of your way to make those connections, to connect with people, to connect with clients, to connect with vendors, to just say, how are you? Makes a really, really huge difference, especially with the people that you're working with. So now I would really love to hear from you some of the things that you are doing. So if you can type into a chat any examples of micro moves that you have experienced, and then we can take a look at what some of those are. And Lisa, I can open up the chat and see these now if it's working for you. And one other one that I'll share too, just as an idea, as you're typing all of these in, I was talking to someone about this in the industry, and he's like, you know what? A micro move to me is someone going out of their way to celebrate small wins, okay? Because a win before would have been, we just signed a contract, we landed at a date, this is when it's happening, this is when we're going to start working on it. Like, that was the win. Now it's a win if we go 3 hours and we don't get a phone call with a fire to put out or a sad message. Now we celebrate when someone calls and has a date in mind. So it's like finding those different little moments to celebrate and taking action to do that for yourself and your team. And as I look at some of these other things that are coming into chat right now, I love this. We had a tea party where we all wore hats, cool hats. I love that one. I hope you also had like little tea cakes too. That would be my addition to it. I love that so much. Electronic greeting cards, FaceTime Fridays. Someone sent you flowers, virtual spa party. There's so much creativity in all of this. Thank you so much for sharing them. I hope everyone keeps sharing these so you can learn from each other. Clearly, there's just so many different things that you can do. And like the little, I know some people are writing in about Starbucks gift cards and just $5. I mean, that kind of stuff makes a huge, huge difference because it says I'm thinking of you, right? That's awesome. And as I'm reading these too, there's a lot of things that it looks like people are doing for each other in the industry. And this is something about connection that I think is a little unique to the event industry because of how you're all so interwoven and connected. And a while ago when we were working with some event planners, one of them said something, and I'll share this quote with you. She said, "The friends and bonds I've made, you're in the trenches together. You have a bond and a friendship that other people don't understand. The people I'm friends with in this industry would drop and do anything for me." These are some deep trenches that we're all in right now. And the connections that you have built, that you are building and that you are maintaining, and all the things that you're just writing in right now about what you're doing for each other, that is truly how you maintain a healthy culture. It's how you maintain a healthy industry, is continuing to rely on those connections. And there's been actually a lot of research about connection, and I'll just share this one piece here where this person has been researching connections for a very long time. He said it's a superpower. Connection is truly a superpower. It makes you more productive. It makes you happier. It makes you smarter. So can't emphasize enough, connections, so important. And with that, so talking about these different things, I said that there's two other things that we're going to talk about maintaining a healthy culture. So I'll jump to our second one. Now, the second one that I want to talk about is communication. And communication is critical. Excellent, authentic, kind communication is so important right now. It's important always. Maintaining a healthy culture requires excellent communication at all time. And so, I mean, of course, I'm saying this because I think it's so important. And if you can even see on the next slide, it's actually on the slide there too, that it is so important. But if you really think about communication, communication is a hard thing to do, even in the best of times. Miscommunication leads to tons of financial implications. There's a lot of error that comes from miscommunication. There's a lot of frustration that comes from miscommunication. And my favorite thing that's said about this is this quote by George Bernard Shaw: "The biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it has taken place." Which always makes me smile because I'm like, yes, true words there, George Bernard Shaw. I totally agree. And typically it's actually been found that 46% of people, they leave meetings not knowing what they're supposed to do next. I will say with event planners, I feel like if you're in that side of the industry, you're the ones who are responsible for making sure that everyone knows what they're going to do next. So I think you might be on the other side of this one than experiencing it yourself from time to time. But when we look at communication, especially during a crisis, it's even harder to do. So in the most basic sense then, why is communication so hard? Why do I keep saying that? There's two specific areas that we look at about why communication is hard. And you'll see this here on the next slide. The first one is we have a need to manage impressions. That's the first one I'll go through. The second one that I'll go through is, say this with kindness, we're not very good at listening. Okay, so let's start with talking about managing impressions. And I'm going to start talking about impression management. And this one specifically, I want to just call out that this is really something to really tune into if you're a leader on the call. Leaders, this is really hard right now. It is a hard time to be anyone who is working. It's a hard time to be a leader who's working. When you think about how you've been trained and mentored, my guess is that many of you didn't get a pandemic communication training. That's not a training that many people get. If you did get that, awesome. But for many people, many leaders, this can kind of feel like, someone described this to me, it's like trying to fly the plane while I'm building it. It's hard. And there's a lot of leaders I'm talking to who they're saying, you want to show up in the right way for your team. You want to be thinking about all the good things that are going on. You want to be giving them the right path forward. And I need to make sure that I sound like I have everything together. And so it turns into like this constant overthinking. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm overthinking about overthinking, and I'm overthinking again, and then I'm overthinking. It's like this constant thing that's going on in your brain. You might not be getting good sleep. You're worried about your people all the time. And when it comes to communication, some of the things I've heard is like, if I say something wrong, this could cause a big upset. If I don't have all the information, why should I say something in the first place? And then what happens is there can be delays in communication. There can be so much thinking about communication that it doesn't happen. And really what we're looking at, what happens in this time is that there's this focus so much on what you're doing right or how you're coming across that the communication isn't getting across to the other person in the way that they need it. And a crisis, really, this is the time when we have to think of, okay, what can I do to make sure all my communication is for these other people? And the way I like to think about it is that many times we learn that we operate by the golden rule. And the golden rule, I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. It's treating others how you would want to be treated. This is a wonderful lesson that many people learned. But right now, it's not as productive to maintain a healthy culture. Instead, what's even better is operating by the platinum rule, which is treating others, communicating with others as they need to be treated and they need to be communicated with. So with that lens on communication for other people, what can you do to really maintain this healthy culture? One really important thing is to communicate, communicate, communicate. Err on the side of over-communicating. There's so much going on right now, and I've spoken to some leaders in the event industry, and they're telling me, they're like, I have so much going on every single day. There aren't even enough hours in the day to take care of what's happening. And even though that's the case, the ones who then make time to communicate a lot with their teams, those are the ones who feel healthiest and most cohesive. Because when there's space for people who are non-leaders, when there's time where there isn't communication happening, that's the time when you start telling yourself all kinds of stories, you start going down paths you don't need to go down. And something that can bring this around is some form of clarity in communication from your leader. So some ideas of how to do this is, one, to send an update every morning. I know things right now, it's like things are changing every 12 hours. So what you said on Monday about your plan for the week, that's going to change on Tuesday, if not Monday afternoon. So sending an update every morning to your team is a really good way to level set. Another thing that you can do is send video updates. And I think I saw that a little bit earlier in the chat that you have some executives, some people who are sending video updates. This is one of the best things that you can do, especially sending a video update to people who aren't necessarily in your office every day. So if you have people who are furloughed, if you're still trying to connect with those people, send a video. Doesn't have to be every day, but it can be every week to say, as much as you can say about what you're doing and what you're handling and how you're dealing with it. This is specifically important because if you think of people who are furloughed employees, those are people you want to come back. This is a time when people are looking at leaders and they're looking at their work environments and they're like, the way that I'm treated right now, is this still the place that I want to be working? There's a lot of people who are questioning. And so there's a lot of other people who are saying, wow, I cannot believe how leadership and people have stepped up. I will never go anywhere else. Keeping people engaged in different ways like that with these updates every morning, with sending video updates, that's a way to really keep that culture, even if people aren't there with you every single day. And the third piece I'll say on this is to, when you communicate, stay on topic and address the biggest fears first. This is kind of one of those things where it's like everyone knows that there's a lot going on. This is not the time to sugarcoat. This is not the time to beat around the bush. Get to the point, say what you need to say. That is one of the best things that you can do for your people. Now, the next piece of this communication is more of like how you communicate. And for that, I will say the best thing you can do is to practice selective vulnerability. Vulnerability, when you have the courage to show up, to be seen as you are in that moment, It shows people that you are authentic. It shows people that you are real. There's this extra little piece of vulnerability right now, and that's the selective piece. Because it's easy for, someone can come in as a leader, and I actually was talking to someone this morning in a meeting, a women's network meeting, and she said, yeah, my boss got together with us and she said, hey, everyone, I don't know what's happening. Everything is confusing. Everything is unclear. And I'm really scared and I don't know what we're going to do. That was the end of what she said. While she was being vulnerable, you can imagine that what that caused in her other people was panic, some overwhelm, more questioning. And so the best thing that you can do is say, look, I'm scared. There are things going on right now that I'm really worried about. And I'm confident in our people. I'm confident that connection is something that we'll always need. So we're going to be having these events again. I know that our core values means that we don't quit and we find new ways to do things, right? It's like finding that different piece of a path forward. And I'll share this quote with you because I think it describes selective vulnerability really well. And it's that the best leaders show vulnerability when assessing a situation, but then present a clear path forward. When everything is changing, the best thing you can do is provide some clarity. And an example of someone who I think did this really well, and I'll just touch on this because I'm sure in your industry you've seen all about this, but the Marriott CEO, Arne Sorensen, shared his video message, and it's about 6-ish minutes long. If you haven't watched it, I encourage you to do so. And he truly was a role model for selective vulnerability, about getting to the point really early, about saying what needed to be said, also talking about how he was feeling and what he saw as a path forward because of his company and who worked for that company. So really good example if you haven't seen it. Okay, now that is all talking about communication. I mentioned that was very specific to leaders, also I think applicable to other people, but this next piece I'll talk about with communication is truly applicable for everyone. All right, when we talk about communication, right, I mentioned there's 2 reasons about why it's hard: managing impressions and also less than awesome listening, I like to call it. You've probably experienced being in a situation where people aren't listening really well. And I think that this next slide does a very good job of representing what that can feel like. Oh, I'm sorry, did the middle of my sentence interrupt the beginning of yours? Right? It's like we're talking and then someone jumps in and we're like, cool, excellent. You weren't really listening to me. It's true that communicating is really, really hard. And part of the reason is because we can think a lot faster than people talk. So when someone is talking, it's very common for us to be thinking, okay, I'm listening. Interesting what you're saying. I want to touch on that later. What's for lunch? Need to get lunch, then I got to make sure that email's sent out and my kids need to do their homework right now, so I got to make sure they're doing that. What's happening with the dog? They're making so much noise. Wait, I'm still listening. I'm tuned in. It's hard to tune in and be a very present listener. In a crisis, it can be even more difficult to tune in and be really good at listening. And what typically ends up happening is that people listen more to respond instead of listening to understand. And right now we're in a time where we really need to listen to understand a lot more than we need to listen to respond. What this looks like is practicing active listening. Active listening is listening without problem solving. I will admit that this is hard for me to do. I like to help people solve problems. If you are a person who likes to solve problems, it's hard to listen without suggesting, without giving advice, without offering something that helped you that might help them. But when we do that, we feel this pressure to make their lives better, but the truth is that it's not our job to find a way to make their lives better. It's our job to just be there for them. And I was thinking about this. I was having a conversation with my brother. He's a small business owner like me. He has a very different business, but we're both small business owners. And we were having a conversation recently, and we were kind of talking about the challenges that we were having. And I started talking to him about, this is what's good, this is what's hard right now. And as soon as I started into that list, he started jumping in with all these ideas and all these things that you could do. And then he's like, oh my gosh, Hannah, come on. Our genetics, you know how we are as oobles, okay? This is how we approach this. And then he was going into all this stuff about what to do. And he eventually stopped and he looked at me and he said, Hannah, you look really tired right now. Are you okay? And I was getting tired in that conversation because I felt like I was in a battle almost with him, where it's and I told him and I realized, I said, you know what? I think all I need you to do is just hear me right now. Thank you for trying to help me, but it's not helping me with you trying to solve my problems. And he was like, I'm so sorry, Hannah. Look, everything you're going through, it sounds hard. How can I support you? That's all I needed. And that's all a lot of people need right now, is for you to chime in and say, hey, you know what? This is hard. I'm sorry. That sounds hard. And that's it. The other thing you can do to practice this active listening is to truly ask, how are you? And then provide space to answer. It's common, especially, where I live and with people that I speak to. I know we have people from all over the world jumping into this. So there's probably an instant response to how are you, depending on where you live. But here for me, that answer is fine. Answer is fine. It's how are you? I'm fine. I'm good. I'm fine. And I had a mentor that I was talking to, and she was asking, it's how are you? And I was like, I'm fine. I'm fine. She's like, oh, you're fine. Okay, cool. You're fed up, you're insecure, you're neurotic, and you're emotionally constipated. You're fine. Great. Okay, why don't you tell me how you really are? I was like, touche. Okay, great. I'm not fine. But it took someone taking the time to say, look, I am really here to ask you, how are you? And my mentor was, a lot of the people are here. So take that time to truly ask and provide space for people to answer. Okay, so we got one more section to get through, but before I do that, I want, if you'd all be so willing, some of you, to practice some selective vulnerability and to type into the chat, how are you? Just how are you right now? It can be one word, it can be a phrase. Would love to hear if you're willing to share. Yeah. Yeah, there's some different things here. Roller coaster, dystopian, strange, crazy, stressful, busy, exhausting, rough, surprised. Yeah, there's overwhelmed is one I'm seeing a lot. There's a lot of feelings right now. Tired, anxious, yeah, eager to get back to work, sad for the life I'm not having right now. Thank you for sharing, for continuing to share all of these different things. This is hard, right? It's even a little bit hard sometimes to share some of these things that we're feeling right now, and to find space to share what we're feeling right now. And it's kind of thinking about feelings in work and how they intersect is something I've been really passionate about a long time. We're passionate about it at our company. And it's one of those things that people, you don't talk about feelings in work usually. Like emotions in work, emotions in the professional world, they don't usually intertwine very much. But I'm actually going to talk about that next. And so I thank you for sharing this and sharing this information, because we're going to spend the next section talking about emotions. And the reason we're talking about that right now is because to maintain a healthy workplace right now, we have to talk about how we're managing the emotional culture, the emotional workplace culture. Emotions and work, like I said, they've not always gone hand in hand. But right now, to think that those emotions that you're feeling aren't impacting your work, or that you're working with people who have emotions that aren't impacting the workplace culture, is silly. Of course, we're all being affected by this. We are all in this together, and that means that we're all on these roller coasters. So I point out this different roller coaster again, because when you are in these different dips and swerves and moving all over the place, and you're pivoting, and it's fine, and it's great, we all cope in different ways, okay? We're all unique individual people. We all grew up in different places and different homes. We're working in different environments and different work cultures. So when we cope and when we process, people will do different things, right? So sometimes the best thing that we can do is like, okay, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to go on the internet and I am going to be the person who is finding memes. I just need to read and find all of the different memes that are out there. And you can even see this. There's some memes that are on the slide. And if we go to the next slide, I love this one. It was shared by a Gen Y millennial parent. Kids now complaining about waiting 5 seconds for Netflix to load. Meanwhile, we had to live through this dial-up. So there's some people who are going here and coping. I'm one of those people sometimes. There's other things we're doing where like people are going on Twitter or they're sharing tweets that they think are really funny. So you'll see this on the next one. Me overthinks everything and cries. Also me, sees funny post and laughs. Okay, I'm back. Just part of that roller coaster, moment to moment. Also, you can see some people are learning how to TikTok and learning how to go to, like, spending a lot of time on TikTok. This is really common right now. So you can see an example of that on the slide. There's a lot of different things that people are doing to cope because of all these feelings. Some people are really hyperproductive. Some people are ready to create and innovate and do the next thing. None of them are wrong. None of them are right. It's all what we need in this moment. And on a more serious note, if you think about these ranges of emotions that people are having, and it's talking about anger, sadness, overwhelm, panic, frustration, and grief. Grief is a very real thing that people are feeling right now. And it's been talked about here, this discomfort you're feeling, this grief. And I'm going to touch on this a little bit because with some people I've spoken to, like a lot of these feelings we're processing, we might not know that they're grief. And so, you can be going through the different stages of grief, or you could be feeling some ambiguous loss right now. And if you're not familiar with ambiguous loss, here's a definition, and it can be described in different ways for different situations. For this one, for a work kind of situation, it's a loss or losses which are more complicated because they involve unimaginable circumstances that result in ambiguity or uncertainty. When I think about ambiguous loss, I think about the person who was going to retire this month, but wasn't able to see people or say goodbye or have a retirement party. I think of people who were furloughed or who were laid off, who very sadly couldn't have an official goodbye just because of the nature of everything. That's a huge loss. There's no closure. I think about when you're moving these amazing in-person events to amazing digital ones, and you're so happy and you're so proud about that. But there's also this feeling where it hurts because there's something there that you're not experiencing and you know it. So that's one thing you can be feeling. And another thing is anticipatory grief. So anticipatory grief, it's been described here as that feeling we get about what the future holds when we're uncertain. And this is where you can go to a place where it's like, oh my gosh, I'm imagining the worst. What are the worst things that can happen? And sometimes thinking worst case scenario is a coping mechanism, and I get it because then you're prepared for the worst so you can handle everything else. But in another way, it's like you can spend so much time grieving what's not going to happen in the future. So we're in these stages of ambiguous loss, of anticipatory grief. And again, it all makes sense that we're having these feelings because we're all, for the most part, right, we're experiencing this global pandemic for the first time. And Brene Brown, she discussed this very recently. Maybe some of you have seen it. She calls it the FFTs. And I've removed the expletive from the slide, but if you want to know it, you can listen to her stuff. I've rephrased it here as the flippin' first time. It's the first time you're doing something. It's always more vulnerable. It's always more confusing. It's scarier. And this is the first time that we're all experiencing this. And I think about sometimes it's described as like, okay, we're experiencing the new normal. This is not normal. This is new. We're in this stage of new every single day. We're figuring this out all the time. So when you're in these FFTs, you're going to have these different emotions, and thinking about then how those emotions impact you, maybe how they impact the people around you, there are some things you can do for yourself. And I know there was a really great panel this morning if you were able to tune into it. I'm sure that there were some excellent things that were discussed there. What I will share with you here is first, what you can do for yourself is extend grace to yourself. And what that looks like is when we have a lot of emotions going around, a lot of feelings going around, it's recognizing that our feelings, they aren't necessarily facts, right? They aren't facts. So we can be kind to ourselves. We can have compassion for having all the feelings we're having. We can forgive ourselves for going through those motions because that's okay and that is completely acceptable. It's also grace to yourself. If you're someone who's still working and you have a lot of friends who are not, I know there's some guilt that some people feel because they are still working. That's another place to extend grace to yourself. There are people who feel like they aren't being as productive as they need to be in this new FFT that we're in right now. And there's some guilt about that. It's like, that's okay. It's okay that you're not producing in the same way. Of course you're not producing in the same way. So all of this stuff is just to be kind to yourself, and it takes time, it takes a lot of work. And one suggestion I will say here is if you're thinking of how to get through this, one thing I've heard and seen work well is to name it. I like to say name it to tame it. That's kind of my favorite way to phrase it. And I was talking to one friend of mine, and she works in the healthcare industry, and she was saying that she was really struggling. And she said, I decided I needed to journal every single thing that I was feeling. So she wrote an entire journal, pages and pages, and she's like, I cried, I processed, I was going through so many things. And then when I was able to write them all down, all of a sudden they felt more distant from me, and I knew that I could control them in some way. And then she was able to go to her team, and she brought some Wellness Wednesday newsletters to her team. She really turned it into an opportunity. And you don't have to do that specifically, but it's finding ways to tune in and check in with where you're at, so you can check in with other people. And you can say, not necessarily like, I was on the bathroom floor last night crying and I had a margarita. Like, you don't need to go into that depth, right? But you can say, I'm not at my best today. I'm going to need some help. Can you help me? And that's where we all have the other opportunity here to extend grace to other people. Extending grace looks like understanding we're all going through this, right? That means that you assume positive intent. Assume that where people are coming from, it's all okay. They're not trying to hurt you. They're not trying to get angry with you. They're just in a place. They're just in a spot. And that's the second piece about extending grace to others is, as much as you can, don't take things personally. People are going to snap. People are going to be in different moods than you've seen them in before. And as much as you can, look at that and take it in and say, you know what? This isn't about me. This is how they're processing right now. And that's going to be okay. And the third thing here is I would say to be generously, radically kind. Emotions are contagious. Actions are contagious. It's really easy right now to get caught up in fear and to get caught up in questioning. I get it. I'm there we bounce around all the time. When you can be radically kind, that can be contagious. And the other thing that can be contagious is hope. Having hope for what the future of your industry looks like, having hope for what the future of what your role will be, can be incredibly powerful. I was having a conversation with someone close to me in this industry, and I loved the way that he said what this means to him. And you can see this here on the next slide. He said, you have fear, which is an unknown quantity, or you have hope, which is an unknown quantity. Which are you going to choose? And I love this idea of thinking about hope because, hope alone is not what's going to get us through this. The only way out is through. Hope alone won't get us through, but it makes the process through a lot easier. So with that, I'm going to open it up for some Q&A, and the last few minutes that we have here, we'll probably only have a couple minutes for questions. But I want to say thank you. If some of you are logging off, thank you so much for being here during this time. Please know that, you can always reach out to us if you have questions or if you just want to share and you need a listener. We're here for that too. And big thank you to EIC for inviting us in to be a part of this today. Really appreciate it. But with that, we'll open it up for Q&A. So Lisa, does it work for you to ask me one of the questions that you're seeing there? Okay, you know what? I will actually open it up. I can look at the chat here. Look at that. I'm learning technology right now. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so as team members with leadership who don't seem to have a genuine care or interest for our mental health, during this time, they try, but it doesn't feel like a priority. How can we let them know we need a little extra time or support than usual while also showing we are still worthy of a paycheck? That's a really good question. One thing that I've seen that I thought was really cool is because, like you said, they're probably trying right now, but there's potential these leaders don't even know what to do and they're panicking about the business. So one thing I've seen is if in the beginning of the week you send a message and you say, these are my top priorities this week. These are the 5 things that I'm going to get done. And then at the end of the week, you summarize all of the different things that you've got done for them and what you're planning for the next week. It creates some calm for them. So it feels like you're getting more done, even though they're not seeing it all the time. So that's one thing I would recommend is just be really clear with how you're being productive and just writing it down so then people can see it and it creates some more calm for them. Okay, I think I've got time for one more question here. Interactions are getting turned into transactions feels particularly close for working with clients. How can we provide micro moves into client interactions when we aren't working with them directly anymore? That's a good question. I actually was just having a conversation about this morning. So what I've been hearing some people do is they are reaching out not in the sense of, well, there's 2 different ways you can reach out. I think it really depends on your relationships and who you're talking to. Some people are saying, we're coming up with all these creative ideas about what we can do for these clients that they maybe can't see. So like sometimes as a client, you're like, oh my gosh, now all these things have happened. I can't even see a way forward, and you can see a way forward. So some people I know are reaching out to clients and saying, hey, this might be hard. We're still working and innovating over here. Here's some of what we're doing. Let us know if any of this would work for you. We'd love to keep working with you. So that's one thing. I can see how that might be a little bit too salesy and might not feel appropriate. So in that case, what I would recommend is just reaching out to those clients with a note, sending them flowers, sending them something to their homes, and just saying, hey, I'm thinking of you. This is a really hard time for everyone. I hope you're doing okay. And there's different things that you can get right now. Like there's little cards that have quotes on them that are really nicely designed. I know someone has sent something like that to some people I know as well. And that's just like a little token to say, I'm thinking of you, but it doesn't necessarily say, hey, let's keep working together. Of course, later on, they're going to think of you as that person that really reached out because you cared. And my guess is that you do actually really care. So going that extra step can make a huge difference. All right. With that, it is at the end of our time right now. So again, thank you. I'm sorry I didn't get to all those questions, but hopefully we can find a way to connect later on. I'd love, again, I'm here to listen if you need anything. And with that, thank you. I'll pass it back to you, Derek.
Thank you so much, Hannah. And on behalf of Events Industry Council, we would like to thank you for joining us today. EIC will be sending you your CE 1 week after the conclusion of this webinar. And as a reminder, this webinar will be available for playback in the EIC Knowledge Hub. Thank you, everyone. This webinar will now end. And thank you, Hannah.
Awesome. Thank you.